Congressman Chris Stewart. Hi, Chris. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Glenn Beck. Good to be with you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming on and talking about FAUCI. I don't know if you had a chance to see the special we did last night. No.
I did not. It turns out, Glenn, they don't broadcast your special on the House floor. I think they should.
Were you on the House floor last night?
Yeah.
So you are pushing through the FAUCI Act. What is it?
Well, I love the acronym. Someone smarter than I did come up with this. Fairness and Accountability Underwriting Chinese Institutions. But it bans the funding of gain-of-function research in China, which is clearly important, but it does more than that. It demands accountability for what happens there. It demands honesty, and then this should be blazingly obvious. We should restrict government officials and punish government officials who intentionally mislead Congress, and it's pretty clear that's happened. And so it's just to try to tie these loose ends that, I mean, a 7-year-old could look at the evidence and draw certain conclusions. Everyone except for apparently Dr. Fauci, who, when you challenge him on some of the stuff, he thinks you're attacking science.
Unbelievable.
Look.
But wait a minute. Hang on just a second. How will this help? Because what he did, he changed the definition of gain of function. I mean, if you're the guy in charge, you can change the definition. He granted waivers to Dr. Beck and Dr. Shi when they stopped the funding. He said, yeah, that's right, except for this research. And then when he couldn't directly fund, he went through EcoHealth. And basically, I think it's more of a money laundering system where they are taking the money from the NIH, they're giving it to Peter Daszak, and then he is taking that money and he's funding the lab and the research in Wuhan. So Fauci could easily say, well, I wasn't funding that. I was funding this company, and what they do with their money is their business.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there will always be, people who find ways around the intent of law or legislation. And unfortunately, that's just true. But this will make it harder. But more than that, Glenn, it shines a light on what you've been trying to do for a long time now. It shines a light and exposes the truth, and it exposes the deception. And helps the American people to see that at least some members of Congress see this, and at least some members of Congress are trying to fix it. But Glenn, I remember going back, sitting on the Intel committee early in this process, and having agencies and other individuals come to us and telling us, yeah, we don't think it came from the lab. And I was so frustrated and angry with him. How can you possibly say that? How could you possibly know that already? And for you already to draw the conclusion that it did not come from the lab, when I think you could show this to a 7th grader and they'd say, well, the evidence seems to indicate otherwise. Common sense seems to indicate otherwise. And it was one of the great deceptions of Dr. Fauci when he scoffed at that and belittled and ridiculed anyone who would even propose it, when we now know that he knew that they were doing this gain-of-function research at the labs, and he was deceptively presenting that towards the American people, and as I said, ridiculing anyone who would even suggest something he knew that was happening. And the evidence or the behavior of the Chinese is so obvious. Why in the world did the very first thing they do is go in and destroy these samples? Other than they did not.
Chris, you have to watch the special last night, because I have put together the timeline. And Fauci absolutely knew what was going on. It is so clear that it came from this lab and that Fauci then covered it up. You remember all the Fauci emails that came out and they were all redacted? Well, If you're smart, you just FOIA the people who were on the CC list and hope that theirs wasn't redacted or it was redacted in different places. And then you can piece all of the emails together. Well, that's what we did. And when you see, it was in 2 days, Fauci went from a total panic to meeting with a guy from Wellcome, which is from England, a really spooky funder of stuff up until like the 1980s. They were still going for eugenics. They disavowed eugenics in the 1980s. And they are the second biggest funder next to the NIH. And they get on the phone right away, and say, Fauci's own email, gain of function research. And they start talking about what's going on in China. We have to find out, but it's all off the record. We'll talk about it in person. They bring a meeting together, and they decide what the story is. And the story is, this did not come from a lab. Some of the people that were involved in that were staunchly for the lab theory, said that this is not natural. Well, what do you know? They come out of that meeting and they say, nope, definitely not in a lab, and we should discredit anyone. The very next day, they begin to discredit anyone who says it came from a lab. And 6 months later, those scientists that said they changed their mind, guess who got funding? Millions of dollars in funding. Those guys. I mean, this is a clear-cut cover-up. And Fauci is at the center of all of it. It's bad.
Glenn, I couldn't agree with you more, and you didn't ask a question in there, so I'll respond to say I agree with you, and what you're saying is right. If I could make 2 points, if I could.
Yeah.
For those on the left who deify Dr. Fauci, I asked him, why in the world are you doing that to an individual who has admittedly lied to you again and again and again? And the CDC should not be politicized. They should simply tell the truth. And for example, early in the pandemic, if there aren't enough masks, then don't lie to the American people and say masks don't work. When what you really mean is, hey, we don't want you to wear masks. We need to save them for first responders. And that was the first lie. And then to lie about the origins, and then to lie about the funding, and it goes on and on. Why would you deify someone who admittedly lies to you about something important? And the other important point I'd like to make, and it's a sidebar, but it's I think critical to this, and that is the maliciousness of the Chinese Communist Party. We were watching Wuhan, and they shut that city down hard. You could not air travel from Wuhan to any other Chinese city. You couldn't take a train, a car. You couldn't literally not hike out of the city. They shut down every trail, every dirt road, with one exception, and that is you could fly internationally from Wuhan to Los Angeles to New York to Paris and to London and a number of other cities. And China essentially said, we know this is going to have enormous economic costs. We know it's going to have enormous human costs, and we're not going to suffer alone. We're going to make sure the rest of the world suffers with us, and then we're going to use it to our economic advantage. And part of this effort is to hold China accountable as well for their maliciously seeding this virus around the rest of the world.
Well, I will tell you, in 2018, Peter Daszak from EcoHealth, Dr. Shi, and Dr. Barrett from the United States all sent a proposal to DARPA, and they proposed making humanized mice, taking coronaviruses from bat poop, and trying to get it into a humanized mouse lung to see if it would kill and then make a vaccine. DARPA said no. DARPA said no, not going to fund it. But they already had funding. And if you look at something that was published in 2020 by Wuhan, it's that experiment. And that experiment was done in Wuhan by these people in the summer of 2019. Then in September, you have the Wuhan data bank being shut down. On September 12th, you have security called in, and they beef up security and lock the place down. The next day, they call out for bids and for an emergency air handling system. They need to change out all the air handling. Then 2 weeks after that, they order an air incinerator. And then you have 3 researchers in one hospital. We have all the Chinese documents in Chinese and translated. You have 3 people that were working in that lab going for COVID-like symptoms in one hospital. And in October, we have the records of 10 different hospitals in Wuhan, and all of them, 10 hospitals, had COVID like symptoms, and they were treating people who were dying of COVID in October. And the same time, they do nothing. China allows the games, the World War games, to go on in Wuhan, and they were checking the temperature of everyone who got off and on a plane in October.
Yeah.
Chris.
Well, Glenn, the research you've done on this is just a beautiful thing. Thank you for doing it. I mean, you've said things that I don't know anyone else in the country has said, and it wasn't easy for you to get this information. Thank you for doing it. The FAUCI Act will help you and others, as it does require greater transparency, but more importantly, it forbids us from ever doing anything like this again.
But Chris, we have to, I mean, first of all, I don't know, can you get this through with the Democrats in charge?
Well, it turns out that's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I figure.
And I don't really understand that, Glenn. I mean, why
either.
in the world would the Democrats not say, hey, China was malicious in this, we should hold them accountable, and if any U.S. persons or U.S. organizations were complicit in it, we should hold them accountable? Why is that a partisan issue to take?
Because of what is, we all know is the deep state. Fauci is part of that. He does what he wants to do, no matter what the law is, no matter what the president says. He just goes around it. We have to root out all of these actors who just do whatever they want, no matter what you guys say.
Well, and what it comes down to as well is, does anyone think that this administration is serious about holding China accountable? Does anyone think that China, President Xi, is intimidated or fearful of this president?
No.
And there's a reason why he's not. And I think that's a partial explanation as well as to why our Democratic colleagues in the House are not going to be helpful on this.
Chris,
Glenn, the good news is we're going to take the House and Senate in 2 years.
Yes.
Or I'm sorry, in a year. We're going to, and then we will do this work that they won't allow us to do right now.
Chris, you are so good on foreign affairs. President Xi and President Biden had a 3-hour meeting. The reports from China says that President Xi said, "You're messing with fire with Taiwan, and you will get burned." The news reports from China say that Biden just wanted to talk about global warming, and he said he won't mess with Taiwan and China. I don't know if I believe that, but I don't know what to believe anymore. Have you heard anything on this?
Well, I think our readout is different than theirs. There's no question about it. And that's why they put their readout first. But I will say this, too. I don't believe for a second this is a 3.5-hour meeting unless it included nap time. This president, I just don't think anyone engages for that amount of time. But if you don't think those conversations took place, take a look at the conversations that took place up in Alaska, where the Chinese embassies or ambassadors came and just berated our Secretary of State and others in a very public way, in a way that we've never seen before. And then ask yourself, do you not think the same thing happened in this conversation? Because once again, President Xi is not intimidated by this administration.
No. Chris, thank you for everything you guys are doing. Thank you for being one of the people that you're actually standing up for the regular person. I'd like to send you all this research so you have it, because I think that will help you on the floor of the House with the FAUCI Act. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Glenn. I'll look forward to that.
You got it. Congressman Chris Stewart, and please call your congressman and tell them you want passage of the FAUCI Act, which will hold people accountable for what they do in China.